The Nth Commandment by Fannie Hurst. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Keely Brown. The Nth Commandment. The Christmas Ballad of the Stoker, even though writ from the fiery bowels of amidships, and with a pen reeking with his own sweat, could find no holiday sale, nor the story of the waiter who serves the wine he dares only smell, and weary stands attendant into the joyous dawn. Such social sores, the drayman, back bent to the Christmas box whose mysteries he must never know. The salesgirl standing on her swollen feet on into the midnight hour, such sores may run and fester, but not to sicken public eyes. For the Christmas spirit is the white flame of love burning in men's hearts and may not be defiled. Shop windows, magazine covers, and postcards proclaim goodwill to all men. Bedtime stories crooned when little heads are drowsy, or of peace on earth. Corporations whose draymen's backs are bent and whose salesgirls' feet are swollen plaster each outgoing parcel with a goodwill toward men stamp, and remove the stools from behind the counters to give space to more of the glittering merchandise. In the Mammoth store the stools have long since been removed, and the holiday hysteria of peace on earth rose to its Christmas Eve climax, as a frenzied gale drives upward the sea into mountains of water, or scuds through black-hearted forests, bending them double in wild salaam. Shoppers pushed through aisles so packed that the tide flowed back upon itself. A narrow-chested woman, caught in the whirl of one such vortex, fainted back against the bundle-laden arms that pressed her on. Above the thin orchestra of musical toys, the tramp of feet like an army marching, voices raucous from straining to be heard, a clock over the grand central stairway boomed 9, and the crowd pulled at its strength for a last hour of bartering, tearing, pushing, haggling, sweating. Behind the counters, workers sobbed in their throats and shifted from one swollen foot to the other. A cash girl, her eyeballs glazed like those of a wounded hare in the torture of the chase, found a pile of pasteboard boxes behind a door, and with the indifference of exhaustion dropped onto it asleep. The tide flowed on, and ever and again back upon itself. A Santa Claus in a red canton flannel coat lost his white canton flannel beard, nor troubled to recover it. A woman trembling with the ague of terror drew an imitation bisque doll off a counter and into the shallow recesses of her cape, and the cool hand of the law darted after her and closed over her wrist an imitation bisque evidence. A prayer, a moan, the crowd parting and closing again. The mammoth Christmas tree beneath the grand central stairway loped ever so slightly of its own gorgeousness, and the gold star at its apex titillated to the tramp-tramp of the army. Across the novelty leather goods counter, Mr. Jimmy Fitzgibbons leaned the blue-shaven, predaceous face that head waiters and underfed salesgirls know best over a hot bird and a cold bottle. Men's hands involuntarily close into tight fist when his well-pressed sleeve accidentally brushes their wives or sisters. $6-a-week salesgirls scrape their luscious rare birds to the bone, drink thin gold wine from thin gold-edged glasses, and curse their God when the reckoning comes. Behind the novelty leather goods counter, Mrs. Violet Smith, whose eyes were the woodland blue her name boasted, smiled back and leaned against the stock shelves, her face upturned and like a tired flower. "If the rush hadn't quit right this minute, I couldn't have lasted it out till closing. Honest, I couldn't." "Poor tired little filly." "Even them 10 minutes I got leave to go up to old Ingram's office, they made up for when I came back, and put another batch of them 59-cent leatherette purses out in the bin." "Poor little filly. What you need is a little speed. I want to blow you tonight, doll. You went once and you can make it twice. Come on, doll. It ain't every little girl I'd coax like this." Jimmy, I want to blow you tonight, doll. A poor little blue-eyed queenie like you, all froze up with nothing but a sick husband for a Christmas tree. A poor little baby doll like you. The kid, too, Jimmy. I oughtn't. Didn't you tell me yourself it sleeps through the night like a whippersnapper? Don't be a quitter, doll, didn't you? Yes, but a poor little baby doll like you. Why, there just ain't nothing too good for you. Some little time I showed you last Tuesday night, eh, doll? Yes, Jimmy. Well, if you think that was some evening, you watch me tonight. I can't go, Jimmy, him laying there, and the kid and all. Didn't I have to coax you last time, just like tonight? And wasn't you glad when you looked out and seen how blasted cold and icy it was that you let me blow you, wasn't you? Yes, Jimmy, but didn't I blow you to a bottle of bubble water to take home with you, even after the big show was over? And wouldn't I have blown you to yellow instead of the red if you hadn't been a little cheapskate and wanted the red? Didn't I pin a $2 bunch of hothouse grapes on your hat right out of the fruit bowl? Didn't I blow you for proper? It was swell, Jimmy. Well, I'm going to blow in my winnings on you tonight, doll. It's Christmas Eve, and yes, it's Christmas Eve, Jimmy, and he had one of his bad hemorrhages last night, and the kid, she's too little to know she's getting cheated out of her Christmas. But gee, a kid ought to have something, a tree or something. He leaned closer, hemmed in by the crowd. It's you ought to have something, doll. I never ought to gone with you last Tuesday night, Jimmy. When I got home, he was laying there like a rag. I like you, doll. I'm going to blow in the stack of my winnings on you. That's how much I like you. There ain't nothing I wouldn't do for a little filly like you. Jimmy. There ain't. Oh. You wouldn't be in the hole you are now, doll, if you hadn't sneaked off 2 years ago and done it while I wasn't looking. Nearly 2 whole years you let me lose track of you. That ain't a nice way to treat a fellow that likes you. We went boarding right away, Jimmy, and I only came back to the department 2 months ago, after he got so bad. Ain't I told you how things just kind of happened? I liked you myself, doll, but you fell for a pair of shoulders over in the gents' furnishing that wasn't wide from nothing but padding. I could have told you there was all cotton batting and no lungs there. I could have told you. Jimmy, ain't you ashamed? Jimmy! Oh, I was just kidding. But you ain't real on that true blue stuff, doll. I can look into your eyes and see you're bustin' to let me blow you. That's what you get, sweetness, when you don't ask your Uncle Fuller first. If you'd have asked me, I could have told you he was weak in the chest when you married him. I could have told you that you'd be back here 2 years later selling leatherette vanity cases and supporting a— You! Jimmy Fitzgibbons! You— Gad, doll, go to it. When you color up like that, you look like a rose. A whole bouquet of them. You don't know nothing about him. He never knew he had a lung till a month after the kid came, and they moved the gents' furnishing over by the Broadway door where the draft caught him. Sure he didn't, doll. No harm meant. That's right. Stand by him. I like to see it. Why, a little queen across the counter from you told me you'd have married him if he'd had 3 bum lungs. That crazy you was. Like fun. If me or him had dreamt he wasn't sound, I wouldn't be in this mess. I wouldn't. Her little face was pale as a spray of jessamine against a dark background, and try as she would to check them, tears sprang hot to her eyes. Dew trembled on her lashes. Poor little filly. More tears rushed to her eyes, as if he had touched the wellsprings of her self-compassion. You gotta excuse me, Jimmy. I ain't crying, only I'm dog-tired from nursin' and drudgin' and nursin'. Hard luck, little un. Him layin' there and me trying to make things meet. You gotta excuse me, Jimmy. I'm done up. That's why I want to blow you, sweetness. I can't bear to see a little filly like you running with the odds dead agin her. You been swell to me, Jimmy. The sky's my limit, doll. Maybe it wasn't right for me to go with you last Tuesday night, him layin' there and the kid and all. But a girl's gotta have something, don't she, Jimmy? A girl that's got on her shoulders what I got has gotta have something. A laugh now and then. That's the goods, doll. A little filly like you has got to. Honest, the way I laughed when you stuck them hothouse grapes on my hat for trimming the other night, just like they didn't cost nothing. Honest, the way I laughed give me enough strength for a whole night's nursin'. Honest, I felt like in the old days before I was married. Gad, if you had treated me white in them days, doll, if you hadn't pulled that saint stuff on me and treated me cold storage, there ain't nothing I wouldn't have done for you." I didn't mean nothing, Jimmy." "I ain't sore, doll. I like you, and I like your style. I always did, even in the days when you turned me down, you great big beautiful doll, you." "Oh, you—" "If you're the real little sport I think you are, you're going to let me blow you to the liveliest Christmas a little queen like you ever seen. I didn't make that winning down in Atlanta for nothing. When I got the telegram, I says to myself, here goes. I'm going to make last Tuesday night look like a prayer meeting. I am, eh, doll?" I can't, Jimmy. Shh." A tide flowed in about the counter, separating them, and she was suddenly in the center of a human whirl, a battle of shoulders and elbows and voices pitched high with gluttony. Mr. Fitzgibbon skirted its edge, patient. Outside, a flake floated down out of the dark pocket of packed clouds, then another and yet another, like timid kisses blown down upon the clownish brow of Broadway. A motorman shielded his eyes from the right merry whirl and swore in his throat. A fruit-cheeked girl paused in the flare of a Mammoth store show window, looked up at her lover and the flaky star that lit and died on his mustache, and laughed with the musical glee of a bird. A beggar slid farther out from his doorway and pushed his hat into the flux of the sidewalk. More flakes, dancing upward like suds blown in merriment from the palm of a hand, light, lighter, mad matter, weaving a blanket from God's own loom, from God's own fleece, whitening men's shoulders with the heavenly fabric. Mrs. Violet Smith cast startled eyes upon the powdered shoulders and snow-clumped shoes passing down the aisleway, and her hand flew to her throat as if to choke its gasp. "My, it ain't snowin', is it? It ain't snowin'?" Mr. Jimmy Fitzgibbons wormed back to the counter. His voice was sunk to the golden mezzo of an amorous whisper. "Snowin' is right, doll. A real dyed-in-the-wool white Christmas for you and me." "Snowin'? Don't you like snow, baby doll? Cheer up. I'm going to hire a taxicab by the hour. I'm snowin'." She breathed inward, shivering, stricken, and her mouth, no older than a child's, trembled at the corners and would not be composed. He can't stand no snowstorm. That's why the doctor said if we could get him south before the first one, if we could get him south before the first one, south where the sun shines and he could feel it clear through him, oh, ain't I in a mess?" "Poor little Philly." He focused his small eyes upon her plump and throbbing throat. "Poor little Philly, all winded." There's the bell, doll. Poor tired little girlie. Hurry and I'll buy you a taxicab. Hear it, there's the closing bell. Merry Christmas, doll, Merry Christmas." A convulsion tore through the store, like the violent asthma of a 30,000-ton ocean liner breathing the last breath of her voyage and slipping alongside her pier. On that first stroke of 10, a girl behind the candy counter collapsed frankly, rocking her left foot in her lap, pressing its blains, and blubbering through her lips salty with her own bitter tears. A child, qualified by legislation and his 14 years to brace his soft-boned shoulder against the flank of life, bent his young spine double to the weight of 2 iron exit doors that swung outward and open. A gale of snow and whistling air danced in. The crowd turned about, faced, thinned, died. Mrs. Violet Smith turned a rose-white face to the flurry. "Snowin'." "A real made-to-order white Christmas for you and me, doll, the kind you read about." It don't mean nothing to me, but—" "Sure it does. I'm going to blow you right, doll. Half the money is yourn anyways. You made that winning down in Atlanta yesterday as much as me, girlie. If I hadn't named that filly after you, she'd have been left at the post." You never had the right to name one of your race-horses after me. There ain't a girl ever went out with you that you ain't named one after. You never had the right to." "I took it, kiddo, 'cause I like you. Gad, I like you. Nix, it ain't every little girl I'd name one of my stable after. Violet, some little pony that. Odds agin her, and walks off with the money." Sometimes I just wish I was dead." No, you don't, doll. You know you just want to go tonight, but you ain't got the nerve. I want to show you a Christmas Eve that'll leave any Christmas Eve you ever spent at the post. Gad, look out there, will you? I'm going to taxicab you right through the fuzz of that there snowstorm if it costs every cent the filly won for us." Mrs. Smith leaned back against the shelves limp, as if the blood had run from her heart, weakening her, but her eyes the color of lake water when summer's moment is bluest. Her lips, that were meant to curve, straightened in a line of decision. "I'll go, Jimmy." "That's the goods." "A girl's just got to have something to hold herself together, don't she? It ain't like the kid and Harry was laying awake for me. Last Tuesday they was both asleep when I got home. They don't let each other get lonesome, and Harry, there ain't nothing much for me to do round home." "Now you're talking the English language, doll." "I'll go, Jimmy." He extended his cane at a sharper angle until it bent in upon itself, threatening to snap, and flung one gray-spatted ankle across the other. "Sure you're going, a poor little filly like you, sound-kneed, sound-winded, and full of speed, and nothing but trouble for your Christmas stocking. A poor little blue-eyed doll like you." "A girl's got to have something. You knew me before I was married, Jimmy, and there never was a girl more full of life." "Sure I knew you, but you was a little cold storage queen and turned me down." Harry, he never asks me nothing when I come in, and the kid's asleep anyways." "Color up there, little doll. Where I'm going to take you there ain't nothing but live ones. I'm going to take you to a place where the color scheme of your greenbacks has got to be yellow. Color up there, doll. You ain't going dead, are you?" She stretched open her eyes to wide laughing pools, plowed through the rear counter debris of pasteboard boxes and tissue paper, reached for her jacket and tan boyish hat. A blowy corn-colored curl caught like a tendril and curled round the brim. "Going dead! Say, my middle name is Speed. It's like Harry used to tell me when we wasn't no farther along in the marriage game than his sneaking over here from the gents' furnishing 3 times a day to price billfolders. He used to say that I was a live wire before Franklin flew his kite." "Doll." "I ain't tired, Jimmy. Not counting the 1.5 years I was home before Harry took sick. I've been through the Christmas hell just 6 times. The 7th don't mean nothing in my life. I've seen 'em behind these very counters, cursing Christmas with tears in their eyes and spending their merry holiday in bed trying to get some of the soreness out. It takes more than one Christmas to put me out of business." "Here, let me tuck that curl in for you, doll." "Quit!" "Doll." "Quit, I say." "Color up there, girlie. Look alive." She rubbed her palms briskly across her cheeks to generate a glow, and they warmed to color as peaches blushed to the kiss of the sun. "See?" "Pink as cherries." "That's right. Kid me along." "Tried to dodge me tonight, didn't you, kitten?" I didn't think I ought to go tonight." "It's a good thing my feelings ain't hurt easy." "Honest, Jimmy, I didn't try to dodge you. I only thought, with the girls here gabbling so much about last Tuesday night and all, it wouldn't look right. And he had a spell last night again, and the doctor said we ought to get him south before the first snow. South, where the sun shines. But he's got as much chance of getting south as I have of climbing the South Pole." "A pretty little thing like you climbing the South Pole. I'd be there with field glasses, all righty." I went up and talked and begged and talked to old Ingram up at the Aid Society today, but the old skinflint says they can't do nothing for an employee after he's been out of his department more'n 8 weeks. And Harry's been out 12. He says the society can't do nothing no more, much less send him south. Just like a machine he talked. I could have killed him." "Poor little filly. I was that surprised when I seen you was back in the store again. There ain't been a classy queen behind the counter since you left." "Oh, Jimmy, no wonder the girls say you got your racehorses beat for speed." "That's me." Aisles thinned and the store relaxed into a bacchanalian chaos of trampled debris, merchandise strewn as if a flock of vultures had left their pickings, a battlefield strewn with gewgaws and the tinsel of Christmastide, and reeking with foolish sweat. "Button up there, doll, and come on. It's a swell night for Eskimos." Mr. Fitzgibbons folded over his own double-breasted coat, fitted his flat-brimmed derby hat on his well-oiled hair, drew a pair of gray suede gloves over his fingers, and hooked his slender cane to his arm. "Ready, doll?" "The girls, Jimmy. Look at 'em, rubbering and gabbling like ducks. It ain't like I could do any good at home. It ain't." "I'd be the first to ship you there if you could. You know me, doll." His words deadened her doubts like a soporific. She glanced about for the moment at the Dionysian spectacle of the mammoth store, ravished to chaos by the holiday delirium, at the weary stream of shoppers and workers bending into the storm as they reached the doors, at the swift can-can of snowflakes dancing whitely and swiftly without, and Mr. Jimmy Fitzgibbons standing attendant. Then she smiled. "Come on, Jimmy." "Come on yourself, doll." Snow beat in their faces like shot as they emerged into the merry night. She shivered in her thin coat. "Gee, ain't it cold?" "Not so you can notice it. Watch me, doll." He hailed a passing cab with a double flourish of cane and half lifted her in, his fingers closing tight over her arm. "Little doll, now I got you, and we understand one another, don't we, doll?" She leaned back, quiescent, nor did his hold of her relax. A fairy etching of snow whitened the windows and the windshield, and behind their security he leaned closer until she could feel the breath of his smile. "Doll, we sure understand each other, don't we, sweetness, eh? Answer me, sweetness, don't we, eh? Eh?" "Yes, Jimmy." Over the city bells tolled of Christmas. The gentle Hestia of Christmas Eve snug beside her hearth, with little stockings dangling like a badly matched row of executed soldiers, the fire sinking into embers to facilitate the epic descent from the chimney, the breathing of dreaming children trembling for their tomorrow. This gentle Hestia of 1,000 Christmas Eves was not on the payroll of Maxwell's $1,000-a-week cabaret. A pandering management, with its finger ever on the thick wrist of its public, substituted for the little gray lady of tradition the glittering novelty of full-lipped bacchantes whose wreaths were grape and mistletoe commingling with the grape. An electric fountain shot upward its iridescent spray, now green, now orange, now violet, and rained down again upon its own bosom and into a gilt basin shaped like a grotto with the sea weeping round it. And out of its foam, wraith-like, rose a marble Aphrodite, white-limbed, bathed in light. On the topmost of a flight of marble steps a woman sang of love who had defiled it. At candle-shaded tables, thick tongues wagged through thick aromas and over thick foods, and as the drama was born rhythmic out of the noisy dithyramb, so through these heavy discords rose the tink of Venetian goblets, thin and pure, the reedy music of grinning Pan blowing his pipes. Rose-colored light lay like a blush of pleasure over a shining table spread beside the coping of the fount. A statue-like waiter, born but to obey and, obeying, sweat, bowed less easy recognition and bent his spine to the back-aching, heart-breaking angle of servitude. And through the gleaming maze of tables, light-footed as if her blood were foaming, Mrs. Violet Smith, tossing the curling ribbon of a jest over one shoulder. Following her, Mr. Jimmy Fitzgibbons, smiling. "Here, sit on this side of the table, doll, so you can see the big show." "Gee!" "It's the best table in the room to see the staircase dancing." "Gee!" "Told you I was going to show you a classy time tonight, didn't I, doll?" "Yeah, but I ain't dressed for a splash like this, Jimmy. I ain't." "Say, they know me round here, doll. They know I'd fall for a pair of eyes like yourn if you was doing time on a rock pile and I had to bring you in stripes." "I'm a sight." "If you wasn't such a little pepper box, I'd blow you to a feather or two." "Ain't no pepper box." "You used to be, doll. 2 years back there wasn't a girl behind the counter ever gimme the cold storage like you did. I liked your nerve, too, derned if I didn't." I only thought you was guying." "I ain't forgot, doll, the time I asked you out to dinner one night when you was looking pretty blue round the gills, and you turned me down so hard the whole department gimme the laugh. It's a good thing I ain't got no hard feelings." "Honest, Jimmy, That was just before you stole the march on me with the Charlie from the gents' furnishing. I ain't holding it against you, doll, but you gotta be awful nice to me to make up for it, eh?" A shower of rose-colored rain from the fountain threw its soft blush across her face. "Oh, Jimmy, don't rub it in. Ain't I trying hard enough to square myself? I was crazy with the heat 2 years ago. Now it's different. It's like you say, Jimmy, you ain't got no hard feelings." She swallowed a rising in her throat and took a sip of clear, cold water. A light film of tears swam in her eyes. "You ain't, have you, Jimmy?" He leaned across the table and out of the hearing of the attendant waiter. "Not if we understand each other, doll. You stick to me and you'll wear diamonds. Gad, I bet if I had 2 more fillies like Violet, I'd run Diamond Pat Cassidy's string of favorites back to pasture, you little queenie, you." Her timid glance darted like the hither and thither of a wind-blown leaf. "I ain't much of a looker for a Broadway palace like you've brought me to, Jimmy. Look at 'em, all dolled up over there. Honest, Jimmy, I feel ashamed." "Just you stick to me, Peaches, and there ain't one at that table that's got on anything you can't have twice over. I know that gang, the Pink Queen and all. 'Longside of you, they look like stacks of bones tied up in a rag of satin." "Oh, Jimmy, look at 'em, so blonde and all." "They're a broken-winded bunch. Look in them bottles on their table. We're going to have twice as many and only one color in our glasses, kiddo. Yellow, the same yellow as your hair, the kind of yellow that's mostly gold. That's the kind of bubble water we're going to buy, kiddo." "Jimmy, such a spender." "That's me." "It's sure like the girls say, the sky's your limit." "Look, doll, there's the swellest little dancer in this town, one swell little pal and a good sport. Watch her, kiddo. Watch her do that staircase dance. Ain't she a lollapaloo?" A buxom nymph of the grove, whose draperies floated from her like mesh-colored mist, spun to the wild passion of violins up the 8 marble steps of the marble flight. A spotlight turned the entire range of the spectrum upon her. She was like a spinning tulip, her draperies folding her in a cup of sheerest petals, her limbs shining through. "Classy, ain't she, doll?" "Well, I guess." "Want to meet her? There ain't none of 'em that ain't sat at my table many a time." "I like it better with just you, Jimmy." "Sweetness, don't you look at me like that, or you'll get me so mixed up I'll go out and buy the Metropolitan Tower for your Christmas present. What do you want for Christmas, eh, doll?" "Oh, Jimmy, I don't want nothing. I ain't got no right to take nothing from you." She played with the rich, unpronounceable foods on her plate and took a swallow of golden liquid to wash down her fiery confusion. "I ain't got no right." "When I get to liking a little girl, there ain't nothing she ain't got a right to." "Oh, Jimmy, when you talk like that, I feel so... "So what, doll?" So... "Go on, doll." "Oh, I can't say it. You'll think I'm fresh." But she regarded him with the nervous eyes of a gazelle, and the red swam high up into her hair, and he drained his glass down to the bottom of its hollow stem and leaned his warming face closer. "You treat me white, sweetness, and understand me right, and you won't be sorry for nothing you say. Drink, doll, drink to you and me, you and me." Their bubble-thin glasses met in a tink and a pledge, and her ready laughter rose in duet with his. She caught the lilt of a popular song from the 10-piece orchestra and sang upward, with the tirra-lirra of a lark, and the group at the adjoining table threw her a shout. Mr. Fitzgibbons beat a knife-and-fork tattoo on his plate and pinched her cheek lightly, gritting his teeth in a fine frenzy of delight. "That's the way to make 'em sit up and take notice, doll. That's the way I like 'em. Live and frisky as colts." An attendant placed a souvenir of the occasion beside her plate, a white wool bear, upright and with bold bead eyes and a flare of pink bow beneath its chin. "Oh, see, doll, a teddy bear. By gad, a teddy bear with his arms stretched out to hug her. Gad, if I was that Teddy, I'd hug the daylight out of her, too. Gad, wouldn't I? Mrs. Violet Smith wafted the bead-eyed toy a kiss, then slapped him sharply sideways, toppling him in a heap, and her easy laughter mingled with her petulance. I want a big grizzly, Jimmy, a great big brown grizzly bear with a grin. I want a big brown grizzly. Ain't you got one, doll? A little white one with a pink bow. Here, let's give him a drink. But the petulance grew upon her, nor would she be gainsaid. I want a big brown grizzly, a great big brown one with a grin. Aw, doll, look at this little white one. A classy little white one. Look at his nose, cutie, made out of a button. Look, ain't that some nose? Look, ain't a big brown one that I can dance with, Jimmy. I want to dance. Gee, who could dance with a dinky little devil like that? I want to dance, Jimmy. Honest, I could dance with a great big brown one if he was big enough. I want to dance. Jimmy, honest, I could dance with a great big brown one if he was big enough. I want to dance, Jimmy. Gee, I want to. He whacked the table and flashed the twinkle of a wink to the waiter. Gad, doll, if you look at me with them frisky eyes, I want a bear, Jimmy, a great big brown... Waiter! A great big brown one, Jimmy, with a grin. Tell him a great big brown one. Waiter, that ain't no kind of a souvenir to bring a lady. A cheap bunch of wool like that. Bring her a great big brown one. A great big brown one with a grin. Tell him, Jimmy. We have no brown ones, sir. Only the small white ones for the ladies. Get one, then. Get out and buy the biggest one they got on Broadway. Get out and get one, then. But, sir, if the stores ain't open, bust 'em open. I ain't the best customer this joint has got not to get service when my lady friend wants to dance with a great big brown bear. If my lady friend can't get a great big brown bear... With a grin, Jimmy. With a grin. There are other places where she can get 2 great big brown bears if she wants 'em. I'll see, sir, what I can do. Mr. Fitzgibbons brought a fist down upon the table so that the dishes rattled and the wine lopped out of the glasses. Sure you will, and quick, too. A great big brown bear, do you hear? My lady friend wants to dance, don't you, doll? You want to dance, and nothing but a great big brown bear won't do, eh, doll? With a grin, Jimmy. With a grin, d'ye hear? He whacked at her hand in delight, and they laughed in right merry duet. Oh, Jimmy, you're killing! The sky's my limit. She nibbled at a peach whose cheeks were pink as her own, and together from the great overflowing bowl of fruits they must trim her hat with its boyish brim. First, a heavy bunch of black hothouse grapes that she pinned deftly to the crown, a cluster of cherries, a purple plum, a tangerine stuck at a gay angle. They surveyed their foolish labor of caprice with little rills of laughter that rose and fell, and when she replaced her hat, the cherries bobbed and kissed her cheek, and the adjoining group leaned to her in the kinship of merriment. It's a sweller trimming than I gave it last Tuesday, Jimmy. Look how tight it's all pinned on. Look at the cherries. I'm going to blow 'em right off and eat 'em. Eat 'em. She made as if to catch them with pursed lips, but they bobbled sideways, and he regarded her with a swelling pride, then glanced about the room, pleased at the furor that followed her little antics. Gad, doll, you're a winner. I can pick 'em every time. You ain't dolled up like the rest of 'em, but you're a winner. Oh! That's the ticket, waiter. I knew there wasn't nothing round here that tin wouldn't buy. I guess that ain't some great big brown grizzly with a grin for you, doll. Oh! I guess they didn't rustle round when your Uncle Fuller began to get sore and get a great big brown one for you. Gad, the biggest I ever seen. Almost as big as you, doll. That's the ticket. There ain't anything in this town tin can't buy. Oh! She lifted the huge toy off the silver tray held out to her and buried her shining face in the soft silky wool. Ain't he a beauty? Ain't he the softest, brownest beauty? Now peaches, now cherries, now you little fancy fruit stand. There goes the music. Let's see that dance. Oh, Jimmy, I was only kiddin'. Kiddin' nothing. Come now, doll. I blew me $10 if I blew me a cent for that bunch of wool. Come now, let's see that dance you've been blowing about. Go as far as you like, doll.
Honest, I was only guying, Jimmy.
Don't be a quitter and make me sore, doll. I want to show 'em I pick the live ones every time. There's the music.
Oh,
Go as far as you like, doll. Here, give me your hat. Go to it, sister. If you land in the fountain by mistake, I'll blow you to the swellest new duds on the avenue.
I don't know no dances no more, Jimmy. I can't dance with this big old thing anyways. Look, he's almost as big as me.
Go it alone then, doll. But get up and show 'em. Get up and show 'em that I don't pick nothing but the livest. Get up and show 'em, doll. Get up and show 'em.
She set down her glass suddenly and pirouetted to her feet. Here I go, Jimmy.
Go to it, doll.
She leaped forward in her narrow little skirt, laughing. Chairs scraped back, and a round of applause went with her. Knives and forks beat tattoo on frail glasses. A tinsel ball flung from across the room fell at her feet. She stooped to it, waved it, and pinned it to her bosom. Her hair, rich as Australian gold, half escaped its chignon and lay across her shoulders. She danced light as the breeze up the marble stairway, and at its climax the spotlight focused on her, covering her with a sheen of mica, then just as lightly down the steps again, so rapidly that her hair was tossed outward in a fairy-like effect of spun gold.
Go to it, doll. I'm here to back you.
Dare me, Jimmy?
Dare what?
Dare me?
Yeah, I dare you to do anything your little heart desires.
Gad,
if she ain't.
Like a bird in flight, she danced to the gold coping, paused like an audacious Undine in a moment of thrilled silence, and then into the purple and gold, violet and red rain of the electric fountain, her arms outstretched in a radiant tableau vivant, water crowding in about her knees, spray dancing on her upturned face.
Gad, the little daredevil! I didn't think she had it in her. Gad, the little devil!
Clang, clang, tink, tink! Bravo, kiddo! Whoop! Shaking the spray out of her eyes, her hair, she emerged to a grand orchestral flare. The same obsequious hands that applauded her helped her from the gold coping. Waiters dared to smile behind their trays. Up to her knees her dark cloth skirt clung dankly. Water glistened on her shoulders, spotted her blouse. Mr. Jimmy Fitzgibbons lay back in his chair, weak from merriment.
Gad, I didn't think she had it in her. Gad, I didn't.
Whoo! She shook herself like a dainty spaniel, and he grasped the table to steady himself against his laughter.
Gad, I didn't.
Fine weather for ducks.
Gad.
I'm a nice girl, and they treat me like a sponge.
Gad.
April weather we're having, ain't it?
You ain't much wet, are you, doll?
Boo!
Here, waiter, get the lady a coat or something. Gad, you're the head of the place, doll. Oh, you ain't cold, hun. Look, you ain't even wet through. What you shaking about?
She drew inward little breaths of shivery glee. I ain't wet. Say, what do you think that fountain's spouting? Gasoline? I ain't wet. Look at my hair curling up like it does in a rainstorm. Feel my skirt down here at the hem. Can you beat it? I ain't wet, he says.
Here, drink this, doll, and warm up.
No. She threw a dozen brilliant glances into the crowd, tossed an invitational nod to the group adjoining, and clapped her hands for the iridescent Christmas ball that dangled over their table. Here, send her over. Here, give you leave. I'm some little catcher myself. It bounded to her light as air, and she caught it deftly, tossed it ceilingward until it bounced against an incandescent bulb, tossed it again, caught it lightly, nor troubled to heed the merry shouts for its return. From across the room someone threw her a great trailing ribbon of gilt paper. She bound it about her neck like a ruff. A Christmas star with a fluted tissue paper edge floated into her lap. She wore it like an earring, waggling it slyly so that her curls were set a-bobbing. Gimme my bear. She hugged the woolly image to her as if she would beg its warmth, her teeth clicking the while with chill.
Take a little swallow or two to warm you up, doll.
Gee, I took your dare, Jimmy, and boo!
A little swallow, doll.
I took your dare, Jimmy, and I can feel my skirt shrinking up like it was rigging. I guess I'll have to go to work next week in a sheet."
"Didn't I tell you I was backing this toot, sister?"
"I didn't have no right to dive in there and spoil my duds, Jimmy.
Who had a better right?"
"Ain't it just like a nut like me? But I ain't had a lifetime for so long I lost my head. But I ain't got no right to spoil the only duds I got to my back. Look at this waist. The color's running. I ought to... Oh, like I wasn't in enough of a mess already without acting the crazy nut."
"Oh, doll, cut the tragedy. Didn't I tell you I was going to blow you to anything your little heart desires?"
"But the only duds I got to my back, Jimmy. Oh, ain't I a nut when I get started, Jimmy? Ain't I a nut?" She regarded him with tears in her eyes and the wraith of a smile on her lips. A little drop escaped, and she dashed it away, and her smile broke out into sunshine. "Ain't I a nut, though?"
"You're a real, full-blooded little winner. That's what you are, and you can't say I ain't one neither, doll. Here's your damages. Now go doll yourself up like a Christmas tree." He tossed a yellow-back bill lightly into her lap, and she made a great show of rejecting it, even pushing it toward him across the table and to the floor. Oh, what kind of a girl do you think I am? There, take your money. What kind of a girl do you think I am?" Now, sister, don't we understand each other? Them's damages, kiddo. Wasn't it me dared you? Ain't it my fault you doused your duds?"
"Yes, but..."
"Oh, come on, doll. Don't pull any of that stuff on me. You and me understand each other. Not?"
"Yes, but..."
"Take and forget it. You won it. That ain't even interest on the filly's winnings. Take it. I never started nothing in my life I couldn't see the finish to. Take it and forget it." He crammed the bill into her reluctant fingers, closed them over it, and sealed her little fist with a grandiose pat. "Forget it, doll." But her lids fluttered and her confusion rose as if to choke her.
Oh, what kind of a girl do you think I am?"
"I told you I think you're the sweetest, livest little queen I know."
"Oh."
"Come on, little live wire. Put on your swell hothouse-trimmed hat. I'm going to take you to a place farther up the street where there are 2 staircases and a fountain twice as big for you to puddle your little footsies in. Waiter, here, check. Get a cab. Here, little doll, quit your shivering and shaking and let me help you on. Let me help you." She was suddenly pale, but tense-lipped like a woman who struggles on the edge of a swoon.
"Jimmy, honest, I'm shaking with chills. Jimmy, I can't go out in these duds, neither. I gotta go home now. He'll be waking, and I gotta go home now. I'm all shaken." In spite of herself, her lips quivered, and an ache shot through her body. I gotta go home now, Jimmy. Look at me shivering, all shivering."
"Home now?" His eyes retreated behind a network of calculating wrinkles, and she paled as she sat. "Home now? Say, doll, I thought..."
"Honest, I want to go to the other place, but I'm cold, Jimmy, and wet through. I gotta keep well, Jimmy, and I ought to go home."
"Pah!" he said, spluttering out the end of a bitten cigar. "If I'd 'a' known you was a puny doll like that."
"I ain't, Jimmy.
If I'd 'a' known you was that puny. It's like I've been saying, doll. It ain't like you and me don't understand each other.
Sure we do, Jimmy. Honest. Tomorrow night, I can fix it so that the sky's the limit. I'll meet you at Hinckley's at 8. Cross my heart on a wishbone, Jimmy."
"Cross it."
"There. Tonight, Jimmy, I'm chilled. All in. Look at me in these duds, Jimmy. I'm cold. Oh, Jimmy, get me a cab quick, please. I'm cold." She relaxed frankly into a chill that rumbled through her and jarred her knees together. A little rivulet of water oozed from her hair, zigzagged down her cheek, and seeped into her blouse. But her blue-lipped smile persisted. "Ain't I a nut, though? But wait till you see me dolled up tomorrow night, Jimmy. 8 at Hinckley's. I didn't have a hunch how cold that water was. Next time they gotta heat it."
"Gotta heat it is good, doll.
All I gotta do is ask once, and my word's law around here. Here, take a swallow and warm up, hun. You don't need to go home if you warm up right." But the glass tinked against her teeth. I can't." "Go on, kiddo." "I'll take some home with me to warm me up when I get in bed, Jimmy. Not that kind. Give it to me red like you did last Tuesday night, without the sparkles. That's the kind to warm me up. Order a bottle of red without the sparkles, Jimmy, without the sparkles. I can't stand no more bubbles tonight." He helped her into her coat, and she leaned to him with a little movement of exhaustion that tightened his hold of her. "Hurry a cab, waiter. The lady's sick." "Ain't I a nut, though?" "Poor wet little doll. I didn't think you was much more'n damp. You gotta make up for this tomorrow night, doll. 8 sharp, doll, and no funny business tomorrow night." "8 sharp?" "Swell little sport you are, getting the chills. But we understand each other, don't we, doll?" "Sure, Jimmy." "Come on, hun. Shaking like a leaf, ain't you? Wait till I get you out in the cab. I'll warm you up. You look just like a Christmas doll, all rigged up in that hat and that star and all, just like a Christmas doll." "My grizzly, my brown grizzly. Gee, I nearly forgot my grizzly." And she packed the huge toy under her arm, along with the iridescent ball and the gewgaws of her plunder, and out into the cab, where an attendant tucked a bottle of the red warming wine between them. "Ready, doll?" "Ready." The silent storm had continued its silent work, weaving its blankets softer, deeper. The straggling pedestrians of early morning bent their heads into it and drove first paths through the immaculate mantle. The fronts of cars and cabs were coated with a sugary white rime. Broadway lay in a white lethargy that is her nearest approach to sleep. Snowplows were already abroad, clearing tracks, dry snow dust spinning from under them. At Longacre Square the flakes drew upward in spiral flurries, erratic, full of antics. The cab snorted, plunged, leaped forward. Mr. Fitzgibbons inclined toward the little huddle beside him. "Sweetness, now I got you. You little sweetness, you. Now I got you, sweetness." "Jimmy, quit, quit. You. The breath of a forgotten perfume and associations webby with age stir through the lethargy of years. Memories faded as flowers lift their heads, the frail scent of mignonette roused with the dust of letters half a century old, and eyes too dim and watery to show the glaze of tears turned backward 50 years upon the mignonette-bowered scene of love's young dream. A steel drawing-room car rolling through the clean and heavy stench of cow pasture, and a steady-eyed, white-haired capitalist, rolling on his rolling stock, leans back against the upholstery and gazes with eyes tight closed upon a steady-eyed, brown-haired youngster herding in at eventide. The whiff of violets from a vendor's tray, and a young man dreams above his ledger. The reek of a passing brewer's wagon, and white faces look after, suddenly famished. When the familiar pungency of her boarding-house flowed in and round Mrs. Violet Smith, she paused for a moment and could not push through the oppression. Then, with the associations of odor crowding in about her, she stripped herself of her gewgaws, as if here even the tarnished tinsel of pleasure could have no place, and tiptoed up the weary wind of 3 unlighted flights and through the thick staleness of unaired halls. At the 3rd landing, a broom and a dirty, tangled debris of scrub cloths lay on the topmost stair, as if an aching slavey had not found the strength to remove them. They caught the heel of her shoe, pitching her forward so that she fell sharply against her own door. In the gloom she paused for a palpitating moment, her hands pressing her breast, listening, then deposited her laden hat, the little pile of tinsel, and the woolen bear on the floor outside the door. "Vi, that you, dear?" She pulled at her strength and opened the door suddenly, blowing in like a gale. "It's me, darlin'." She was suddenly radiant as morning, and a figure on the bed in the far corner of the dim-lit room raised to greet her with vague white-sleeved arms outstretched. She flew to their haven. "Darlin', darlin', how you feelin'?" "Vi, poor tired little girl. Harry, how you feelin', darlin'? They worked the force all night. First time ever. How you feelin', darlin'? How?" And she burrowed kisses on the poor white face, and then deep into the tiny crib and back again into the vague white arms. "Oh, my babies, both of you. How you feelin', darlin'? So worried I've been. And the kid. Oh, God, darlin', I've been so busy writing stock and all. All night they kept the force. I got such news, darlin'. We should worry that it's snowing. Such news, darlin'. The kid. Harry, did Mrs. Quigley bring her milk on time? How you feelin', darlin'? You ain't coughed, have you?" He kissed her damp hair and turned her face up like a flower, so that his deep-sunk eyes read into hers. "I ain't coughed once since noon, darlin'. We should worry if it snows is right. A doctor's line of talk can't knock me out. I can buck up without going south. I ain't coughed once since noon, Vi. A strangling paroxysm shook him in mockery of his words, and she crouched low beside the bed, her face etched in the agony of bearing each rack and pain with him. "Oh, my darlin', oh. It's all right, Vi. It's all right, it's all right. Oh, my darlin', yes, it's all right now. All right now." She ran her hands over his face as if to reassure herself of his very features, nor would she let him read into her streaming eyes. "Lay quiet, Harry, darlin'. It's all right. Oh, my darlin'." "Shh, Vi, dear. Sure, it's all right. Shh, don't cry, Vi." Oh. "Shh, darlin', don't." I can't help it. But I ain't crying, Harry, I ain't." "All worn out and cold and wet. That's what's a-hurtin' you. All worn out and hysterical and all. Poor little Vi. I ain't." "It's all over now, Vi. See, I'm all right. Everything's all right. Just my luck to have the first one since noon, right when you get home. It's all over now, Vi. Everything's over. Christmas rush and all. Don't you worry about the snow neither, darlin'. I knew it would scare you up, but it takes more than a doctor's line of talk to down and out me." I ain't worryin', darlin'." "You're the one I've been worryin' about, Vi. It's just like the kid was worried, too. Cried when Mrs. Quigley sung her to sleep." Oh, my baby. "Don't worry, dear. She don't even know it's Christmas, a little thing like her. And anyways, look, Videy, Mrs. Quigley brought her up that little stuffed lamb there. But she don't even know it's Christmas, dear. She don't even know. You poor tired little kiddo." "I ain't tired." "I've been lying here all night, sweet, thinking and thinking, a little doll like you hustling and a big hulk like me lying here." "Shh. Honest, Harry, it's fun being back in the store again till you get well. Honest." "I never ought to let you done it in the beginning, darlin'. Remember that night, even when I was strong enough to move a ox team, I told you there was bum lungs way back somewhere in my family? I never ought to let you take a chance, Vi. I never ought." "Shh. Didn't I say I'd marry you if you was playing hooky from the graveyard? Wasn't that the answer I give you even when you was strong as a whole team?" "I didn't have no right to you, baby. The swellest little peach in the store. I didn't have no right to you. Vi, what's the matter? You look like you got the horrors. The horrors, hun. Vi. "Oh, don't, Harry, don't. I can't stand it, hun. I'm tired, darling, but don't look like that, darling. I got news. "Shh, baby, you're all hysterical from overwork and all tired out from worry. There ain't no need to worry, baby. Quigley'll say it can go over another week. She ain't dunning for board, she ain't, baby." I shaking all over, baby, just like you got the horrors. I bet you got scared when you saw the snow coming and tackled Ingram today, and you're blue. What you got the horrors about, baby? Ingram?" No. "I told you not to ask the old skinflint. I told you they won't do nothing after 12 weeks. I ain't bluffed off by snowstorm, Vi. I don't need South no more'n you do. I don't, baby. I ain't a dead one by a long shot yet. Vi, for God's sake, why you got the horrors?" She tried to find words and to smile at him through the hot rain of her tears, and the deep-rooted sobs that racked her subsided, and she snuggled closer and burrowed into his pillow. I can't keep it no longer, darling. I ain't crying. I ain't got the horrors. I'm laughing. I seen him, Harry, Ingram. I seen him just before closing, and oh, Harry, you won't believe it. He said, I'm laughing for joy, Harry. What? What, Vi? What? She fumbled into the bosom of her blouse and slid a small folded square of yellowback bill into his hand. What? What, Vi? What? "A cool 100, darling. Ingram, the Aid Society. Because it's Christmas, darling. They opened up. A cool 100. We can light out tomorrow, darling. A cool 100. Old Ingram, the old skinflint. He opened up like a oyster. South, all of us tomorrow, darling. It ain't nothing for me to get a job south. When I seed it was snowing, I'd have killed somebody to get it. I had to have it, and we got it, darling. We got it. A cool 100. He lay back on the pillow, suddenly limp, the bill fluttering to the coverlet, and she slid her arm beneath his head. "You could have knocked me down too, darling. Easy, just like that," he forked over. "What's the Aid Society for?" he kept saying. "What's the Aid Society for?" Vi, don't cry, darling. Don't cry. I just can't stand it. Shh, easy. Just like that, he gimme it, darling. And me lying here, hating him for a skinflint, and his store for a bloodsucker, and the Aid Society for a fake. Yes, darling. I feel new already, Vi. I can feel the sun already shining through me. If he was here, I could just kiss his hand. That's how it feels for a fellow to get his nerve back. I got my chance now, Vi. There ain't nothing can keep me down. Just like he says, I'll be a new man out there. Look, hon, just talking about it. Feel how I got some strength back already. An hour ago I couldn't hold you like this. Oh, my darling." He sat up suddenly in bed and drew her into his arms, and she laid her cheek against his, and in the silence, from the trundle crib beside them, the breathing of a child rose softly, fell softly. I blew us to a real Christmas, darling, us and the kid. I couldn't help it. I couldn't bear to have her wake up without it, Harry. Her and you and me. A real Christmas, baby. Red wine for you, darling, like I brought you last Tuesday night and warmed you up so nice. The kind the doctor says is so grand for you, darling. Red wine without bubbles, like he says you gotta have. Red wine? Yeah, and black grapes like I brought you last Tuesday, and like he says you ought to have. Black grapes and swell fruit that's good for you, darling. A real blowout, Vi. A bear for the kid, Harry. Vi. Yeah, a real brown grizz, with the grin and all, like she cried for in the window that Sunday. A real big brown one with the grin and all. That cost a real bunch of money, sweet. Yeah, I blew me like 60 for it, hun, but she cried for it that Sunday, and she had to have a Christmas, didn't she, darling? Even if she is too little. It would have broke my heart to have her wake up tomorrow without one. He regarded her through the glaze of tears. My little kiddo. Shh. It just don't seem fair for you to have to... Shh. Everything's fair, darling, in love and war. All the rules for the game of living ain't written down. The 11th Commandment and the 12th Commandment and the 9th Commandment. My little kiddo. Tomorrow, Harry, we're going. South, darling, where he says the sun is going to warm you through and through. Tomorrow, darling. The next day, sweetness. You're all worn out, and tomorrow's Christmas, and... But the shivering took hold of her again, and when she pressed her hand over his mouth, he could feel it trembling. Tomorrow, darling, tomorrow before 8. Every day counts. Promise me, darling. I just can't live if you don't. Tomorrow before 8. Promise me, darling. Oh, promise me, darling. Poor, tired little kiddo. Tomorrow before 8, then. Tomorrow before 8 we go. Her head relaxed. You're tired out, darling. Get to bed, baby. We got a big day tomorrow. We got a big day tomorrow, darling. Get to bed, Videe. I want to spread out her Christmas first, Harry. I want her to see it when she wakes up. I couldn't stand her not seeing it. She scurried to the hall and back again, and at the foot of the bed she spread her gaudy wares. An iridescent rubber ball glowing with 6 colors, a ribbon of gilt paper festooned to the crib, a gleaming Christmas star that dangled and gave out radiance, a huge brown bear standing upright and with bead eyes and a grin. End of the Nth Commandment.
Poison by Jack Snow. From Weird Tales, December 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Dale Grothmann. A brief tale is Poison by Jack Snow. No, it wasn't on Sarah's account that Kristen was doing it. Sarah had simply been the last straw. He had nothing left to cling to now, nothing more to live for. He took out a small bottle from his pocket and stared at it. He pulled the cork and smelled its contents. It smelled of almonds and was colorless, water. He recorked the bottle and placed it carefully in his pocket again. He had got it this morning from the druggist. The stupid fool had gaped at him when he asked for it, but he had got it all right. There was enough poison here, he was sure, for 6 men. Kristen looked at his watch. It was 10 minutes to 12. At 12, on the last stroke of the bell, he would remove the cork and swallow the colorless liquid. Then, God, he would be well out of it. Perhaps he would be able to watch over Sarah. Perhaps he might sing to her in her sleep and bring her beautiful dreams. Kristen was a strange, bright-eyed young man. His eyes were palely green, and some of the folks about town were wont to trace his eccentricities and queer actions to the depths of his gleaming pupils. They said he was mad. That was the reputation he had earned himself by giving way to violent fits of revolt and stormy passion against himself and his world. And now Kristen stood stiffly, staring before him. The wide window was open, and a slight summer breeze stroked the draperies with a gentle, undulating motion. He stared up at the heavens. All this, the crescent moon, the very appointed stars, the deep velvet blue, the low murmuring wind, all would be alien to him in a few minutes. He was going to die at the stroke of the clock. He was calm. It would all go off quietly. What was the use of making a fuss? A few years more or less, what would it matter? Tears sparkled in his eyes. The clock was striking. 10, 11, 12. He uncorked the bottle and raised it to his lips. The liquid went down easily, leaving the characteristic almond taint of the poison in his nostrils. He felt the unmistakable puckering of his lips and mouth. He was trembling and cold. Could it be that he was dying so soon? He sat down on the edge of the mounded white bed. How like a shroud it looked, concealing some gigantic bloated corpse. He arose again and walked to the window. He could not remain still. Action, motion, were what he wanted, and so he was to die tonight, he thought. Had the insidious poison already spread through his system? Was this indeed his last night, his last hour among familiar, homely things? Was all to be changed now? Was nothing ever to be the same? Was he to die tonight? God, he could scarcely bring himself to believe it. 1,000 thoughts rushed through his mind, things he had forgotten. He had not written to his sister. He had meant to write. He must do so before he could die. And his papers. He had forgotten to stop them, and they would keep coming until his room was filled to the ceiling. But why did he think of such things now that he was to die? All was to be changed now. Kristen looked out into the night. How queerly, how vaporously the stars twinkled. They seemed to be dripping starlight. And that wind that was whistling through the treetops. What a wild, roaring wind. And, oh God, he could feel no wind at all. And all those purple clouds hovering so low. What were they? Surely such clouds had never been seen before. They were hollow and reddish-purple, ominous, feverish-looking things. Kristen clenched his fists and turned from the window, although the sound of the roaring wind still filled his head. So he was going to die tonight. It was almost dark in the room, except for the moonlight, and the various objects took on strange and grotesque shapes. Nothing was the same now. Nothing would ever be the same. All was changed and strange. What were those long, thin shadows there in the corner by the window? They were writhing and groping up the side of the wall like huge serpents. He stared palely through the gloom, and then sighed. It was the plants, the flowers and ferns in the pots. How they were growing! Up the wall they crept. Up, up. Now they were spreading over the ceiling. A terrific odor assailed his nostrils. It was the mighty sweetness of the lavender narcissus, towering above him like a small tree. The fern was still growing, mounting higher and higher, interlacing its festoons and weaving about over the ceiling. Would it never cease its wild growth? He could hear its tendrils cracking and unfolding. The room looked like a greenhouse. And then Kristen shook himself. He was allowing his fancy to play tricks on him again. He must control himself. But then, if only fancy, pure and simple, it were, what a mad one! What a strange delirium of the dying mind! That was it. He was dying. All this was only natural. He must resign himself to its weirdness. Dying he was tonight. Oh God, surely not tonight. Not this night. No, no, this was too strange, too terrible. Give him a few hours, just until morning. Only a few brief hours. Let him have tonight. He would not die tonight. He would not. No, no, he would live. He would bring the poison up. Yes, by all the demons of hell it should come up. He would not die. He would not. But oh, how the wind roared and moaned, and the black clouds were gathering thicker and thicker. Kristen stood trembling and perspiring with desperation. Water, water he wanted. Water would bring it up. He must have water. He started toward the door, and then whirled around, gasping. Where was the door? It should be there by the bureau, he remembered. But it was gone. Only the smooth paper was there. Where was it? He groped wildly about the room, feeling with his hands, and stumbling over chairs and stands. This continued for some minutes as Kristen rushed frantically about the room, but at last he gave up. He fell on the bed, trembling and sobbing. He was a prisoner in his own room, and he must have water. Sobs, deep and long, racked his body, and then at last he sat up and stared at the wall. There was a picture, he muttered to himself, a picture of a beautiful green meadow, with a gurgling, singing stream flowing through it. There were golden buttercups and sweet nodding daisies growing on its banks. A calm, china blue sky, and white billowing clouds floating serenely above. There was water, and the escape from death, miserable, rat-like death. What a haven! He seized a chair and placed it underneath the picture. He climbed upon the chair and gazed into the picture for several minutes. How clear and sparkling the water was! How it would cool his poor brain and soothe his fevered lips! He grasped the edges of the picture frame in his hands and stared eagerly, thirstily at the picture. Then, suddenly, he felt himself dangling in the air. He must have kicked the chair from underneath him, he thought. He looked down. But no, there it was. But, oh, how far below him! And how vast, how immense the room had become! And the picture was plunging toward him at a terrific speed. He could hear the water rushing between the banks of the stream. He was still dangling in the air, in space. Things were gigantic, were becoming huger and more gigantarian every moment. Or, wait, could it be that he was growing smaller? Yes, that must be it. The trouble was not with the room and his surroundings, but with himself. It was the effect of the devil's potion. It was shrinking him up smaller and smaller. There was only one thing for Crispin to do. He pulled himself over the edge of the monstrous picture frame and tumbled forward toward the grass. He was in the meadow. Several 100 feet away flowed a dear, sparkling stream. He was walking toward the stream. What a blue sky was above! What sweet, fresh air, stirred only by the gentle fanning breeze! The birds sang, lovely, trilling notes. The next day the news of Kristen's death was made known and spread generally over the town. When it reached the old druggist, he was shaken and bewildered for a moment. Then he retired to the depths of his dark, ill-smelling shop, mumbling and rubbing his chin in perplexity. "Strange," he muttered to himself. "He should have known I wouldn't sell him prussic acid, knowing him as well as I did. But now, how the devil did he kill himself with a bottle rinsed out with almond oil and filled up with water?" The end of Poison by Jack Snow.
The Last Leaf by O. Henry. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Keely Brown. The Last Leaf. In a little district west of Washington Square, the streets have run crazy and broken themselves into small strips called places. These places make strange angles and curves. One street crosses itself a time or two. An artist once discovered a valuable possibility in this street. Suppose a collector with a bill for paints, paper, and canvas should, in traversing this route, suddenly meet himself coming back without a cent having been paid on account. So to quaint old Greenwich Village the art people soon came prowling, hunting for north windows and 18th century gables and Dutch attics and low rents. Then they imported some pewter mugs and a chafing dish or two from 6th Avenue and became a colony. At the top of a squatty 3-story brick, Sue and Johnsy had their studio. Johnsy was familiar for Joanna. One was from Maine, the other from California. They had met at the table d'hôte of an 8th Street Delmonico's and found their tastes in art, chicory salad, and bishop's leaves so congenial that the joint studio resulted. That was in May. In November, a cold, unseen stranger, whom the doctors called pneumonia, stalked about the colony, touching one here and there with his icy fingers. Over on the east side, this ravager strode boldly, smiting his victims by scores, but his feet trod slowly through the maze of the narrow and moss-grown places. Mr. Pneumonia was not what you would call a chivalric old gentleman. A mite of a little woman with blood thinned by California zephyrs was hardly fair game for the red-fisted, short-breathed old duffer. But Johnsy he smote, and she lay scarcely moving on her painted iron bedstead, looking through the small Dutch window panes at the blank side of the next brick house. One morning the busy doctor invited Sue into the hallway with a shaggy gray eyebrow. "She has one chance in, let us say, 10, he said, as he shook down the mercury in his clinical thermometer. "And that chance is for her to want to live. This way people have of lining up on the side of the undertaker makes the entire pharmacopoeia look silly. Your little lady has made up her mind that she's not going to get well. Has she anything on her mind?" She wanted to paint the Bay of Naples some day," said Sue. "Paint? Bosh! Has she anything on her mind worth thinking about twice? A man, for instance?" "A man," said Sue, with a Jew's harp twang in her voice. "Is a man worth— But no, doctor, there is nothing of the kind." "Well, it is the weakness, then," said the doctor. "I will do all that science, so far as it may filter through my efforts, can accomplish. But whenever my patient begins to count the carriages in her funeral procession, I subtract 50% from the curative power of medicines. If you will get her to ask one question about the new winter styles in cloak sleeves, I will promise you a 1 in 5 chance for her, instead of 1 in 10. After the doctor had gone, Sue went into the workroom and cried a Japanese napkin to a pulp. Then she swaggered into Johnsy's room with her drawing board, whistling ragtime. Johnsy lay, scarcely making a ripple under the bedclothes, with her face toward the window. Sue stopped whistling, thinking she was asleep. She arranged her board and began a pen-and-ink drawing to illustrate a magazine story. Young artists must pave their way to art by drawing pictures for magazine stories that young authors write to pave their way to literature. As Sue was sketching a pair of elegant horse-show riding trousers and a monocle on the figure of the hero, an Idaho cowboy, she heard a low sound, several times repeated. She went quickly to the bedside. Johnsy's eyes were open wide. She was looking out the window and counting backward. 12, she said, and a little later, 11, and then 10 and 9, and then 8 and 7, almost together. Sue looked solicitously out the window. What was there to count? There was only a bare, dreary yard to be seen, and the blank side of the brick house 20 feet away. An old ivy vine, gnarled and decayed at the roots, climbed halfway up the brick wall. The cold breath of autumn had stricken its leaves from the vine until its skeleton branches clung, almost bare, to the crumbling bricks. "What is it, dear?" asked Sue. 6, said Johnsy in almost a whisper. "They're falling faster now. 3 days ago there were almost 100. It made my head ache to count them. But now it's easy. There goes another one. There are only 5 left now." "5 what, dear? Tell your Sudie." "Leaves on the ivy vine. When the last one falls, I must go, too. I've known that for 3 days. Didn't the doctor tell you?" "Oh, I never heard of such nonsense," complained Sue with magnificent scorn. "What have old ivy leaves to do with your getting well? And you used to love that vine so, you naughty girl. Don't be a goosey. Why, the doctor told me this morning that your chances for getting well real soon were— let's see exactly what he said. He said the chances were 10 to 1. Why, that's almost as good a chance as we have in New York when we ride on the streetcars or walk past a new building. Try to take some broth now, and let Sudie go back to her drawing so she can sell the editor man with it, and buy port wine for her sick child, and pork chops for her greedy self. You needn't get any more wine, said Johnsy, keeping her eyes fixed out the window. There goes another. No, I don't want any broth. That leaves just 4. I want to see the last one fall before it gets dark. Then I'll go, too. Johnsy, dear, said Sue, bending over her, will you promise me to keep your eyes closed and not look out the window until I am done working? I must hand those drawings in by tomorrow. I need the light, or I would draw the shade down. Couldn't you draw in the other room? Asked Johnsy coldly. I'd rather be here by you, said Sue. Besides, I don't want you to keep looking at those silly ivy leaves. Tell me as soon as you have finished, said Johnsy, closing her eyes and lying white and still as a fallen statue, because I want to see the last one fall. I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of thinking. I want to turn loose my hold on everything and go sailing down, down, just like one of those poor tired leaves. Try to sleep, said Sue. I must call Behrman up to be my model for the old hermit miner. I'll not be gone a minute. Don't try to move till I come back. Old Behrman was a painter who lived on the ground floor beneath them. He was past 60 and had a Michelangelo's Moses beard curling down from the head of a satyr along the body of an imp. Behrman was a failure in art. 40 years he had wielded the brush without getting near enough to touch the hem of his mistress's robe. He had been always about to paint a masterpiece, but had never yet begun it. For several years he had painted nothing except now and then a daub in the line of commerce or advertising. He earned a little by serving as a model to those young artists in the colony who could not pay the price of a professional. He drank gin to excess and still talked of his coming masterpiece. For the rest, he was a fierce little old man who scoffed terribly at softness in anyone, and who regarded himself as a special mastiff in waiting to protect the 2 young artists in the studio above. Sue found Behrman smelling strongly of juniper berries in his dimly lighted den below. In one corner was a blank canvas on an easel that had been waiting there for 25 years to receive the first line of the masterpiece. She told him of Johnsy's fancy, and how she feared she would, indeed, light and fragile as a leaf herself, float away when her slight hold upon the world grew weaker. Old Behrman, with his red eyes plainly streaming, shouted his contempt and derision for such idiotic imaginings. "Was," he shouted, "is there people in the world mit their foolishness to die because leaves they drop off from a confounded vine? I have not heard of such a thing. No, I will not pose as a model for your fool hermit dunderhead. Why do you allow that silly business to come in the brain of her? Ach, that poor little Miss Yonsey." "She is very ill and weak," said Sue, "and the fever has left her mind morbid and full of strange fancies. Very well, Mr. Behrman, if you do not care to pose for me, you needn't. But I think you're a horrid old flibbertigibbet." "You are just like a woman," yelled Behrman. "Who said I will not pose? Go on, I come with you. For half an hour I've been trying to say that I am ready to pose. Gott, this is not any place in which one so good as Miss Yonsey shall lie sick. Some day I will paint a masterpiece, and we shall all go away. Gott, yes." Johnsy was sleeping when they went upstairs. Sue pulled the shade down to the window-sill and motioned Behrman into the other room. In there they peered out the window fearfully at the ivy vine. Then they looked at each other for a moment without speaking. A persistent cold rain was falling, mingled with snow, Behrman, in his old blue shirt, took his seat as the hermit miner on an upturned kettle for a rock. When Sue awoke from an hour's sleep the next morning, she found Jauncey with dull, wide-open eyes staring at the drawn green shade. "Pull it up. I want to see," she ordered in a whisper. Wearily Sue obeyed. But lo, after the beating rain and fierce gusts of wind that had endured through the livelong night, there yet stood out against the brick wall one ivy leaf. It was the last on the vine. Still dark green near its stem, but with its serrated edges tinted with the yellow of dissolution and decay, it hung bravely from a branch some 20 feet above the ground. "It is the last one," said Jauncey. "I thought it would surely fall during the night. I heard the wind. It will fall today, and I shall die at the same time." "Dear, dear," said Sue, leaning her worn face down to the pillow. "Think of me if you won't think of yourself. What would I do?" But Jauncey did not answer. The lonesomest thing in all the world is a soul when it is making ready to go on its mysterious far journey. The fancy seemed to possess her more strongly, as one by one the ties that bound her to friendship and to earth were loosed. The day wore away, and even through the twilight they could see the lone ivy leaf clinging to its stem against the wall, and then, with the coming of the night, the north wind was again loosed, while the rain still beat against the windows and pattered down from the low Dutch eaves. When it was light enough, Jauncey, the merciless, commanded that the shade be raised. The ivy leaf was still there. Jauncey lay for a long time looking at it, and then she called to Sue, who was stirring her chicken broth over the gas stove. "I've been a bad girl, Sudie," said Jauncey. "Something has made that last leaf stay there to show me how wicked I was. It is a sin to want to die. You may bring me a little broth now, and some milk with a little port in it, no, bring me a hand mirror first, and then pack some pillows about me, and I will sit up and watch you cook." An hour later she said, "Sudie, some day I hope to paint the Bay of Naples." The doctor came in the afternoon, and Sue had an excuse to go into the hallway as he left. "Even chances," said the doctor, taking Sue's thin, shaking hand in his. "With good nursing, you'll win. And now I must see another case I have downstairs. Behrman, his name is. Some kind of an artist, I believe. Pneumonia, too. He is an old, weak man, and the attack is acute. There is no hope for him, but he goes to the hospital today to be made more comfortable." The next day the doctor said to Sue, "She's out of danger. You've won. Nutrition and care now, that's all." And that afternoon Sue came to the bed where Jauncey lay, contentedly knitting a very blue and very useless woolen shoulder scarf, and put one arm around her, pillows and all. "I have something to tell you, White Mouse," she said. "Mr. Behrman died of pneumonia today in the hospital. He was ill only 2 days. The janitor found him on the morning of the first day in his room downstairs, helpless with pain. His shoes and clothing were wet through and icy cold. They couldn't imagine where he had been on such a dreadful night. And then they found a lantern, still lighted, and a ladder that had been dragged from its place, and some scattered brushes, and a palette with green and yellow colors mixed on it, and— Look out the window, dear, at the last ivy leaf on the wall. Didn't you wonder why it never fluttered or moved when the wind blew? Ah, darling, it's Behrman's masterpiece. He painted it there the night that the last leaf fell." End of The Last Leaf.
The Red-Headed League by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by James Evans. The Red-Headed League. I had called upon my friend Sherlock Holmes one day in the autumn of last year, and found him deep in conversation with a very stout, florid-faced, elderly gentleman with fiery red hair. With an apology for my intrusion, I was about to withdraw when Holmes pulled me abruptly into the room and closed the door behind me. "You could not have possibly come at a better time, my dear Watson," he said cordially. "I was afraid that you were engaged." "I am, very much so." "Then I can wait in the next room." "Not at all. This gentleman, Mr. Wilson, has been my partner and helped out in many of my most successful cases, and I have no doubt that he will be of the utmost use to me in yours also." The stout gentleman half rose from his chair and gave a bob of greeting, with a quick little questioning glance from his small, fat-encircled eyes. "Try the settee," said Holmes, relapsing into his armchair and putting his fingertips together as was his custom when in judicial moods. "I know, my dear Watson, that you share my love of all that is bizarre and outside the conventions and humdrum of routine everyday life. You have shown your relish for it by the enthusiasm which has prompted you to chronicle, and, if you will excuse my saying so, somewhat embellish so many of my own little adventures. Your cases have indeed been of the greatest interest to me," I observed. "You will remember that I remarked the other day, just before we went into the very simple problem presented by Miss Mary Sutherland, that for strange effects and extraordinary combinations we must go to life itself, which is always far more daring than any effort of the imagination." "A proposition which I took the liberty of doubting." "You did, Doctor, but none the less you must come round to my view, for otherwise I shall keep on piling fact upon fact on you, until your reason breaks down under them and acknowledge me to be right. Now, Mr. Jabez Wilson here has been good enough to call upon me this morning, and begin a narrative which promises to be one of the most singular which I have listened to for some time. You have heard me remark that the strangest and most unique things are very often connected, not with the larger, but with the smaller crimes, and occasionally, indeed, where there is room for doubt, whether any positive crime has been committed. As far as I have heard, it is impossible for me to say whether the present case is an instance of crime or not, but the course of events is certainly among the most singular that I have ever listened to. Perhaps, Mr. Wilson, you would have the great kindness to recommence your narrative. I ask you not merely because my friend Dr. Watson has not heard the opening part, but also because the peculiar nature of the story makes me anxious to have every possible detail from your lips. As a rule, when I have heard some slight indication of the course of events, I am able to guide myself by the thousands of other similar cases which occur to my memory. In the present instance, I am forced to admit that the facts are, to the best of my belief, unique." The portly client puffed out his chest with an appearance of some little pride, and pulled a dirty and wrinkled newspaper from the inside pocket of his greatcoat. As he glanced down the advertisement column, with his head thrust forward and the paper flattened upon his knee, I took a good look at the man, and endeavoured, after the fashion of my companion, to read the indications which might be presented by his dress or appearance. I did not gain much, however, by my inspection. Our visitor bore every mark of an average commonplace British tradesman, obese, pompous, and slow. He wore rather baggy grey shepherd check trousers, a not over-clean black frock coat unbuttoned in the front, and a drab waistcoat with a heavy brassy Albert chain, and a square pierced bit of metal hanging down as an ornament. A frayed top hat and a faded brown overcoat with a wrinkled velvet collar lay upon a chair beside him. Altogether, look as I would, there was nothing remarkable about the man, save his blazing red hair and the expression of extreme chagrin and discontent upon his features. Sherlock Holmes's quick eye took in my occupation, and he shook his head with a smile as he noticed my questioning glances. Beyond the obvious facts that he has at some time done manual labour, that he takes snuff, that he is a Freemason, that he has been in China, and that he has done a considerable amount of writing lately, I can deduce nothing else. Mr. Jabez Wilson started up in his chair, with his forefinger upon the paper but with his eyes upon my companion. "How in the name of good fortune did you know all that, Mr. Holmes?" he asked. "How did you know, for example, that I did manual labour? It's as true as gospel, for I began as a ship's carpenter. Your hands, my dear sir, your right hand is quite a size larger than your left. You have worked with it, and the muscles are more developed." "Well, the snuff, then, and the Freemasonry?" "I won't insult your intelligence by telling you how I read that, especially as, rather against the strict rules of your order, you use an arc and compass breastpin." "Ah, of course, I forgot that. But the writing?" What else can be indicated by the right cuff, so very shiny for 5 inches, and the left one with a smooth patch near the elbow where you rest it upon the desk? Well, but China. The fish which you have tattooed immediately above your wrist could only have been done in China. I have made a small study of tattoo marks, and have even contributed to the literature on the subject. The trick of staining the fish's scales of a delicate pink is quite peculiar to China. When, in addition, I see a Chinese coin hanging from your watch chain, the matter becomes even more simple. Mr. Jabez Wilson laughed heavily. Well, I never, he said. I thought at first you had done something clever, but I see that there was nothing in it after all. I begin to think, Watson, said Holmes, that I make a mistake in explaining. Omne ignotum pro magnifico, you know, and my poor little reputation, such as it is, will suffer shipwreck if I am so candid. Can you not find the advertisement, Mr. Wilson? Yes, I've got it now, he answered with a thick red finger planted halfway down the column. Here it is. This is what began it all. You just read it for yourself, sir. I took the paper from him and read as follows. To the Red-Headed League, on account of the bequest of the late Ezekiah Hopkins of Lebanon, PA, USA, there is now another vacancy open which entitles a member of the League to a salary of £4 a week for purely nominal services. All red-headed men who are sound in body and mind and above the age of 21 years are eligible. Apply in person on Monday at 11 o'clock to Duncan Ross at the offices of the League, 7 Pope's Court, Fleet Street. What on earth does this mean? I ejaculated after I had twice read over the extraordinary announcement. Holmes chuckled and wriggled in his chair, as was his habit when he was in high spirits. It is a little off the beaten track, isn't it? He said. And now, Mr. Wilson, off you go at scratch and tell us about yourself, your household, and the effect which this advertisement had upon your fortunes. You will first make a note, Doctor, of the paper and the date. It is the Morning Chronicle of April 27th, 1890. Just 2 months ago. Very good. Now, Mr. Wilson. Well, it is just as I have been telling you, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, said Jabez Wilson, mopping his forehead. I have a small pawnbroker's business at Saxe-Coburg Square near the city. It's not a very large affair, and of late years it has not done more than just give me a living. I used to be able to keep 2 assistants, but now I only keep 1, and I would have a job to pay him but that he is willing to come for half wages, so as to learn the business. What is the name of this obliging youth? Asked Sherlock Holmes. His name is Vincent Spaulding, and he's not such a youth either. It's hard to say his age. I should not wish a smarter assistant, Mr. Holmes, and I know very well that he could better himself and earn twice what I'm able to give him. But after all, if he is satisfied, why should I put ideas in his head? Why, indeed. You seem most fortunate in having an employee who comes under the full market price. It is not a common experience among employers in this age. I don't know that your assistant is not as remarkable as your advertisement. Oh, he has his faults too, said Mr. Wilson. Never was such a fellow for photography, snapping away with a camera when he ought to be improving his mind, and then diving down into the cellar like a rabbit into its hole to develop his pictures. This is his main fault, but on the whole he's a good worker. There's no vice in him. He is still with you, I presume? Yes, sir. He and a girl of 14 who does a bit of simple cooking and keeps the place clean. That's all I have in the house, for I am a widower and never had any family. We live very quietly, sir, the 3 of us, and we keep a roof over our heads and pay our debts if we do nothing more. The first thing that put us out was this advertisement. Spaulding, he came down into the office just this day 8 weeks with this very paper in his hand, and he says, I wish to the Lord, Mr. Wilson, that I was a red-headed man. Why that, I asked. Why, he says, here's another vacancy on the League of Red-Headed Men. It's worth quite a little fortune to any man who gets it, and I understand that there are more vacancies than there are men, so that the trustees are at their wits' end what to do with the money. If my hair would only change colour, there's a nice little crib all ready for me to step into. Why, what is it then? I asked. You see, Mr. Holmes, I'm a very stay-at-home man, and as my business came to me instead of me having to go to it, I was often weeks on end without putting foot out over the doormat. In that way I didn't know much of what was going on the outside, and I was always glad of a bit of news. Have you never heard of the League of Red-Headed Men? He asked with his eyes open. Never. Why, I wonder at that, if you're eligible yourself for one of those vacancies. And what are they worth? I asked. Oh, merely a couple of hundred a year, but the work is slight, and it need not interfere very much with one's other occupations. Well, you can easily think that made me prick up my ears. for the business had not been over good for some years, and an extra couple of hundred would have been very handy. "Tell me all about it," said I. "Well," he said, showing me the advertisement, "you can see for yourself that the League has a vacancy, and there's an address where you should apply for any particulars. As far as I can make out, the League was founded by an American millionaire, Hezekiah Hopkins, who was very peculiar in his ways. He was himself red-headed, and he had a great sympathy for all red-headed men. So, when he died, it was found that he had left his enormous fortune in the hands of trustees, with the instructions to employ the interest to the providing of easy berths to men whose hair is of that colour. From all I hear, it is splendid pay, and very little to do." "But," said I, "there would be millions of red-headed men who would apply." "Not so many as you might think," he answered. "You see, it's really confined to Londoners, and to grown men. This American had started from London when he was young, and he wanted to do the old town a good turn. Then again, I have heard it is no use your applying if your hair is light red or dark red, or anything but real, bright, blazing, fiery red. Now, if you cared to apply, Mr. Wilson, you would just walk in. But perhaps it would be hardly worth your while to put yourself out of the way for the sake of a few £100. Now, it is a fact, gentlemen, as you may see for yourselves, that my hair is of a very full and rich tint, so that it seemed to me that if there was to be any competition in the matter, I stood as good a chance as any man that I had ever met. Vincent Spaulding seemed to know so much about it that I thought he might prove useful, so I just ordered him to put up the shutters for the day and come right away with me. He was very willing to have a holiday, so we shut the business up, and we started off the address that was given to us in the advertisement. I never hope to see such a sight as that again, Mr. Holmes. From north, south, east, and west, every man who had a shade of red in his hair had tramped into the city to answer the advertisement. Fleet Street was choked with red-headed folk, and Pope's Court looked like a coster's orange barrow. I should not have thought there were so many in the whole country as were brought together by that single advertisement. Every shade of colour there were, straw, lemon, orange, brick, Irish setter, liver, clay, but, as Spaulding said, there were not many who had the real vivid flame-coloured tint. When I saw how many were waiting, I would have given up in despair, but Spaulding would not hear of it. How he did it I could not imagine, but he pushed and pulled and butted until he got me through the crowd, and right up to the steps which led to the office. There was a double stream upon the stair, some going up in hope and some coming back dejected, but we wedged in as well as we could and soon found ourselves in the office. "Your experience has been a most entertaining one," remarked Holmes as his client paused and refreshed his memory with a huge pinch of snuff. "Pray, continue with your very interesting statement." There was nothing in the office but a couple of wooden chairs and a deal table, behind which sat a small man with a head that was even redder than mine. He said a few words to each candidate as he came up, and then he always managed to find some fault in them which would disqualify him. Getting a vacancy did not seem to be such a very easy matter after all. However, when our turn came, the little man was much more favourable to me than any of the others, and he closed the door as we entered, so that he might have a private word with us. "This is Mr. Jabez Wilson," said my assistant, "and he is willing to fill a vacancy in the League." "And he is admirably suited for it," the other answered. "He has every requirement. I cannot recall when I have seen anything so fine." He took a step backward and cocked his head on one side and gazed at my hair until I felt quite bashful. Then suddenly he plunged forward, wrung my hand, and congratulated me warmly on my success. "It would be injustice to hesitate," he said. "You will, however, I am sure, excuse me for taking an obvious precaution." With that he seized my hair in both of his hands and tugged until I yelled with pain. "There is water in your eyes," he said as he released me. "I perceive that all is as it should be, but we have to be careful, for you have twice been deceived by wigs and once by paint. I could tell you tales of cobbler's wax which would disgust you with human nature." He stepped over to the window and shouted through it at the top of his voice that the vacancy was filled. A groan of disappointment came up from below, and the folk all trooped away in different directions, until there was not a red head to be seen, except my own and that of the manager. "My name," he said, "is Duncan Ross, and I am myself one of the pensioners upon the fund left by our noble benefactor. Are you a married man, Mr. Wilson? Have you a family?" I answered that I had not. His face fell immediately. "Dear me," he said gravely, "that is very serious indeed. I am sorry to hear you say that. The fund was, of course, for the propagation and spread of the redheads, as well as for their maintenance. It is exceedingly unfortunate that you should be a bachelor." My face lengthened at this, Mr. Holmes, for I thought that I was not to have the vacancy after all. But after thinking it over for a few minutes, he said that it would be all right. "In the case of another," he said, "the objection might be fatal. But we must stretch a point in favour of a man with such a head of hair as yours. When shall you be able to enter upon your new duties?" "Well, it is a little awkward, for I have a business already," said I. "Oh, never mind about that, Mr. Wilson," said Vincent Spaulding. "I shall be able to look after that for you." "What would be the hours?" I asked. 10 to 2. Now, a pawnbroker's business is mostly done of an evening, Mr. Holmes, especially Thursday and Friday evenings, which is just before payday, so it would suit me very well to earn a little in the mornings. Besides, I knew that my assistant was a good man, and that he would see to anything that turned up. "That would suit me very well," I said. "And the pay?" "It's £4 a week." "And the work?" "It is purely nominal." "What do you call purely nominal?" "Well, you have to be in the office, or at least in the building, the whole time. If you leave, you forfeit your whole position forever. The will is very clear upon that point. You don't comply with the conditions if you budge from the office during that time." "It's only 4 hours a day, and I should not think of leaving," said I. "No excuse will avail," said Mr. Duncan Ross. "Neither sickness nor business nor anything else. You must stay, or you lose your billet." "And the work?" "Is to copy out the Encyclopaedia Britannica. There is the first volume of it in that press. You must find your own ink, pens, and blotting paper, but we provide this table and chair. Will you be ready tomorrow?" "Certainly," I answered. "Then goodbye, Mr. Jabez Wilson, and let me congratulate you once more on the important position which you have been fortunate enough to gain." He bowed me out of the room, and I went home with my assistant, hardly knowing what to say or do. I was so pleased at my own good fortune. Well, I thought over the matter all day, and by evening I was in low spirits again, for I had quite persuaded myself that the whole affair must have been some great hoax or fraud, though what its object might be I could not imagine. It seemed altogether past belief that anyone could make such a will, or that they could pay such a sum of money for doing something so simple as copying out the Encyclopaedia Britannica. Vincent Spaulding did what he could to cheer me up, but by bedtime I had reasoned myself out of the whole thing. However, in the morning I determined to have a look at it anyhow, so I bought a penny bottle of ink, and with a quill pen and 7 sheets of foolscap paper I started off for Pope's Court. Well, to my surprise and delight, everything was right as possible. The table was set out ready for me, and Mr. Duncan Ross was there to see that I got fairly to work. He started me off upon the letter A, and then he left me. But he would drop in from time to time to see that all was right with me. At 2 o'clock he bade me good day, complimented me on the amount I had written, and locked the door to the office after me. This went on day after day, Mr. Holmes, and on Saturday the manager came in and planked down 4 gold sovereigns for my week's work. It was the same next week, and the same week after. Every morning I was there at 10, and every afternoon I left at 2. By degrees Mr. Duncan Ross took to coming in only once of a morning, and then, after a time, he did not come in at all. Still, of course, I never dared to leave the room for an instant, for I was not sure when he might come, and the billet was such a good one and suited me so well that I would not risk the loss of it. 8 weeks passed away like this, and I had written about abbots and archery and armour and architecture and Attica, and hoped with diligence that I might get on to the bees before very long. It cost me something in foolscap, and I had pretty nearly filled a shelf with my writings, and then suddenly the whole business came to an end. To an end? Yes, sir, and no later than this morning. I went to my work as usual at 10 o'clock, but the door was shut and locked, with a little square of cardboard hammered onto the middle of the panel with a tack. Here it is, you can read it yourself. He held up a piece of white cardboard, about the size of a sheet of notepaper. It read in this fashion: "The Red-Headed League is dissolved, October 9th, 1890. Sherlock Holmes and I surveyed this curt announcement, and the rueful face behind it, until the comical side of the affair so completely overtopped every consideration that we both burst out into a roar of laughter. "I cannot see that there is anything very funny," cried out our client, flushing to the roots of his flaming head. "If you can do nothing better than laugh at me, I can go elsewhere." "No, no," cried Holmes, shoving him back into the chair from which he had half risen. I really wouldn't miss your case for the world. It is most refreshingly unusual, but there is, if you will excuse my saying so, something just a little funny about it. Pray, what steps did you take when you found the card upon the door?" "I was staggered, sir. I did not know what to do. Then I called at the offices round, but none of them seemed to know anything about it. Finally I went to the landlord, who was an accountant living on the ground floor, and I asked him if he could tell me what had become of the Red-Headed League. He said that he had never heard of any such body. Then I asked him who Mr. Duncan Ross was. He answered me that the name was new to him. "Well," I said, "the gentleman at number 4. "What, the red-headed man?" "Yes." "Oh," he said, "his name is William Morris. He was a solicitor, and he was using my room as a temporary convenience until his new premises were ready. He moved out yesterday." "Where could I find him?" "Oh, at his new offices. He did tell me the address. Yes, 17 King Edward Street, near St. Paul's. I started off, Mr. Holmes, but when I got to that address it was a manufactory of artificial kneecaps, and no one in it had ever heard of either Mr. William Morris or Mr. Duncan Ross." "And what did you do then?" asked Holmes. "I went home to Saxe Coburg Square, and I took the advice of my assistant, but he could not help me in any way. He could only say that if I waited I should hear by post. But that was not quite good enough, Mr. Holmes. I did not wish to lose such a place without a struggle. So, as I had heard that you were good enough to give advice to poor folk who were in need of it, I came right away to you." "And you did very wisely," said Holmes. "Your case is an exceedingly remarkable one, and I shall be happy to look into it. From what you have told me, I think that it is possible that graver issues hang from it that might at first sight appear." "Grave enough," said Mr. Jabez Wilson. "Why, I have lost £4 a week." "As far as you are personally concerned," remarked Holmes, "I do not see that you have any grievance against this extraordinary league. On the contrary, you are, as I understand, richer by some £30, to say nothing of the minute knowledge which you have gained on every subject which comes under the letter A. You have lost nothing by them." "No, sir, but I want to find out about them and who they are, and what their object was in playing this prank, if it was a prank, upon me. It was a pretty expensive joke for them, for it cost them £32. "We shall endeavour to clear up these points for you. And first, 1 or 2 questions, Mr. Wilson. This assistant of yours who first called your attention to the advertisement, how long had he been with you?" "About a month, then." "How did he come?" "In answer to an advertisement." "Was he the only applicant?" "No, I had a dozen." "Why did you pick him?" "Because he was handy and he would come cheap." "At half wages, in fact?" "Yes." "What is he like, this Vincent Spaulding?" "Small, stout built, very quick in his ways, no hair on his face. Though he's not short of 30, he has a white splash of acid upon his forehead." Holmes sat up in his chair in considerable excitement. "I thought as much," he said. "Have you ever observed that his ears are pierced for earrings?" "Yes, sir. He told me that a gypsy had done it for him when he was a lad." Said Holmes, sinking back into deep thought. "He is still with you?" "Oh, yes, sir. I've only just left him." "And has your business been attended to in your absence?" "Nothing to complain of, sir. There's never very much to do of a morning." "That will do, Mr. Wilson. I shall be happy to give you an opinion upon the subject in the course of a day or 2. Today is Saturday, and I hope that by Monday we may come to a conclusion." "Well, Watson," said Holmes when our visitor had left us, "what do you make of it all?" "I make nothing of it," I answered frankly. "It is a most mysterious business." "As a rule," said Holmes, "the more bizarre a thing is, the less mysterious it proves to be. It is your commonplace featureless crimes which are really puzzling, just as a commonplace face is the most difficult to identify. But I must be prompt over this matter." "What are you going to do, then?" I asked. "To smoke," he answered. "It is quite a 3-pipe problem, and I beg that you won't speak to me for 50 minutes. He curled himself up in his chair, with his thin knees drawn up to his hawk-like nose, and there he sat with his eyes closed and his black clay pipe thrusting out like the bill of some strange bird. I had come to the conclusion that he had dropped asleep, and indeed was nodding myself, when he suddenly sprang out of his chair with the gesture of a man who had made up his mind, and put his pipe down upon the mantelpiece. "Sarasate plays at St. James' Hall this afternoon," he remarked. "What do you think, Watson? Could your patient spare you for a few hours?" "I have nothing to do today. My practice is never very absorbing." Then put on your hat and come. I'm going through the city first, and we can have some lunch on the way. I observe that there is a good deal of German music on the programme, which is rather more to my taste than Italian or French. It is introspective, and I want to introspect. Come along." We travelled by the Underground as far as Aldersgate, and a short walk took us to Saxe-Coburg Square, the scene of the singular story which we had listened to in the morning. It was a poky, little, shabby-genteel place where 4 lines of dingy 2-storied brick houses looked out into a small railed-in enclosure, where a lawn of weedy grass and a few clumps of faded laurel bushes made a hard fight against a smoke-laden and uncongenial atmosphere. 3 gilt balls and a brown board with Jabez Wilson in white letters upon a corner house announced the place where our red-headed client carried on his business. Sherlock Holmes stopped in front of it with his head on one side, and looked it all over with his eyes shining brightly between the puckered lids. Then he walked slowly up the street, and then down again to the corner, still looking keenly at the houses. Finally he returned to the pawnbroker's, and having thumped vigorously upon the pavement with his stick 2 or 3 times, he went to the door and knocked. It was instantly opened by a bright-looking, clean-shaven young fellow, who asked him to step in. "Thank you," said Holmes. "I only wished to ask you how you would go from here to the Strand." "Third right, 4th left," answered the assistant, promptly closing the door. "Smart fellow, that," observed Holmes as we walked away. "He is, in my judgment, the 4th smartest man in London, and for daring I am not sure that he has not a claim to be 3rd. I have known something of him before." "Evidently," I said. "Mr. Wilson's assistant counts for a good deal in this mystery of the Red-Headed League. I am sure that you inquired your way merely in order that you might see him." "Not him." "What then?" "The knees of his trousers." "And what did you see?" "What I expected to see." "Why did you beat the pavement?" "My dear doctor, this is a time for observation, not for talk. We are spies in an enemy's country. We know something of Saxe-Coburg Square. Let us now explore the parts which lie behind it." The road in which we found ourselves as we turned round the corner from the retired Saxe-Coburg Square presented as great a contrast to it as the front of a picture does to the back. It was one of the main arteries which convey the traffic of the city to the north and west. The roadway was blocked with the immense stream of commerce flowing in a double tide inward and outward, while the footpaths were black with a hurrying swarm of pedestrians. It was difficult to realize, as we looked at the line of fine shops and stately business premises, that they really abutted on the other side upon the faded and stagnant square which we had just quitted. "Let me see," said Holmes, standing at the corner and glancing along the line. "I should like to remember the order of the houses here. It is a hobby of mine to have an exact knowledge of London. There is Mortimer's, the tobacconist, the little newspaper shop, the Coburg branch of the City and Suburban Bank, the Vegetarian Restaurant, and McFarlane's Carriage Building Depot. And now, Doctor, we've done our work, so it's time we had some play. A sandwich and a cup of coffee, and then off to Violin Land, where all is sweetness and delicacy and harmony, and there are no red-headed clients to vex us with their conundrums." My friend was an enthusiastic musician, being himself not only a very capable performer, but a composer of no ordinary merit. All the afternoon he sat in the stalls wrapped in the most perfect happiness, gently waving his long, thin fingers in time to the music, while his gently smiling face and his languid, dreamy eyes were as unlike those of Holmes the sleuth-hound, Holmes the relentless, keen-witted, ready-handed criminal agent as it were possible to conceive. In his singular character the dual nature alternatively asserted itself, and his extreme exactness and astuteness represented, as I often thought, the reaction against the poetic and contemplative mood which occasionally predominated in him. The swing of his nature took him from extreme languor to devouring energy, and as I knew well, he was never so truly formidable as when for days on end he had been lounging in his armchair amid his improvisations and his black-letter editions. Then it was that the lust of the chase would suddenly come upon him, and that his brilliant reasoning power would rise to the level of intuition, until those who were unacquainted with his methods would look askance at him, as a man on whose knowledge was not that of other mortals. When I saw him that afternoon, so enwrapped in the music at St. James's Hall, I felt that an evil time might be coming on those whom he had set himself to hunt down. "You want to go home, no doubt, Doctor," he remarked as we emerged. "Yes, it would be as well." "And I have some business to do which will take some hours. This business at Saxe-Coburg Square is serious." "Why serious?" A considerable crime is in contemplation. I have every reason to believe that we shall be in time to stop it, but today being Saturday rather complicates matters. I shall want your help tonight."
"At what time?"
10 will be early enough."
"I shall be at Baker Street at 10.
"Very well. And I say, Doctor, there may be some little danger, so kindly put your army revolver in your pocket." He waved his hand, turned on his heel, and disappeared in an instant among the crowd. I trust that I am not more dense than my neighbours, but I was always oppressed by a sense of my own stupidity in my dealings with Sherlock Holmes. Here I had heard what he had heard, I had seen what he had seen, and yet from his words it was evident that he saw clearly not only what had happened, but what was about to happen, while to me the whole business was still confused and grotesque. As I drove home to my house in Kensington, I thought over it all, from the extraordinary tale of the red-headed copier of the encyclopedia, down to the visit to Saxe-Coburg Square, and the ominous words with which he had parted from me. What was this nocturnal expedition, and why should I go armed? Where were we going, and what were we to do? I had the hint from Holmes that this smooth-faced pawnbroker's assistant was a formidable man, a man who might play a deep game. I tried to puzzle it out, but gave it up in despair, and set the matter aside until night should bring an explanation. It was 9:15 when I started from home and made my way across the park and so through Oxford Street to Baker Street. 2 hansoms were standing at a door, and as I entered the passage I heard the sound of voices from above. On entering his room I found Holmes in an animated conversation with 2 men, one of whom I recognized as Peter Jones, the official police agent, while the other was a long, thin, sad-faced man with a very shiny hat and oppressively respectable frock-coat.
"Ha! Our party is complete,"
said Holmes, buttoning up his pea-jacket and taking his heavy hunting crop from the rack. "Watson, I think you know Mr. Jones of Scotland Yard. Let me introduce you to Mr. Merryweather, who is to be our companion in tonight's adventure."
"We're hunting in couples again, Doctor, you see," said Jones in his consequential way. "Our friend here is a wonderful man for starting a chase. All he wants is an old dog to help him do the running down."
"I hope a wild goose may not prove to be the end of our chase," observed Mr. Merryweather gloomily.
"You may place considerable confidence in Mr. Holmes, sir," said the police agent loftily. "He has his own little methods, which are, if he won't mind my saying so, just a little too theoretical and fantastic, but he has the makings of a detective in him. It is not too much to say that once or twice, as in that business of the Sholto murder and the Agra treasure, he has been more nearly correct than the official force."
"Oh, if you say so, Mr. Jones, it is all right," said the stranger with deference. "Still, I confess that I miss my rubber. It is the first Saturday night for 27 years that I have not had my rubber." "I think you will find," said Sherlock Holmes, "that you will play for a higher stake tonight than you have ever done yet, and that play will be more exciting. For you, Mr. Merryweather, the stake will be some £30,000, and for you, Jones, it will be the man upon whom you wish to lay your hands."
"John Clay, the murderer, thief, smasher, and forger. He's a young man, Mr. Merryweather, but he is at the head of his profession, and I would rather have my bracelets on him than any criminal in London. He's a remarkable man, is young John Clay. His grandfather was a royal duke, and he himself has been to Eton and Oxford. His brain is as cunning as his fingers, and though we meet signs of him at every turn, we never know where to find the man himself. He'll crack a crib in Scotland one week and be raising money to build an orphanage in Cornwall the next. I've been on his track for years, and I've never set eyes on him yet."
"I hope that I may have the pleasure of introducing you tonight. I've had 1 or 2 little turns also with Mr. John Clay, and I agree with you that he is at the head of his profession. It is past 10, however, and quite time that we started. If you 2 will take the first hansom, Watson and I will follow in the second." Sherlock Holmes was not very communicative during the long drive, and lay back in the cab humming the tunes which he had heard in the afternoon. We rattled through an endless labyrinth of gas-lit streets until we emerged into Farringdon Street. "We are close there now," my friend remarked. "This fellow Merryweather is a bank director, and personally interested in the matter. I thought it as well to have Jones with us also. He's not a bad fellow, though an absolute imbecile in his profession. He has one positive virtue. He is as brave as a bulldog, and as tenacious as a lobster if he gets his claws upon anyone. Here we are, and they are waiting for us." We had reached the same overcrowded thoroughfare in which we had found ourselves in the morning. Our cabs were dismissed, and following the guidance of Mr. Merryweather, we passed down a narrow passage and through a side door which he opened for us. Within there was a small corridor which ended in a very massive iron gate. This also was opened, and led down a flight of winding stone steps which terminated at another formidable gate. Mr. Merryweather stopped to light a lantern, and then conducted us down a dark, earth-smelling passage, and so, after opening a third door, into a huge vault or cellar which was piled all round with crates and massive boxes. "You are not very vulnerable from above," Holmes remarked as he held up the lantern and gazed about him. "Nor from below," said Mr. Merryweather, striking his stick upon the flags which lined the floor. "Why, dear me, it sounds quite hollow," he remarked, looking up in surprise. "I really must ask you to be a little more quiet," said Holmes severely. "You have already imperilled the whole success of our expedition. Might I beg that you would have the goodness to sit down upon one of those boxes, and not to interfere?" The solemn Mr. Merryweather perched himself upon a crate, with a very injured expression upon his face, while Holmes fell upon his knees upon the floor, and with the lantern and a magnifying lens began to examine minutely the cracks between the stones. A few seconds sufficed to satisfy him, for he sprang to his feet again and put his glass in his pocket. "We have at least an hour before us," he remarked, "for they can hardly take any steps until the good pawnbroker is safely in bed. Then they will not lose a minute, for the sooner they do their work, the longer time they will have for their escape. We are, at present, Doctor, as no doubt you have divined, in the cellar of the City branch of one of the principal London banks. Mr. Merryweather is the chairman of directors, and he will explain to you that there are reasons why the more daring criminals of London should take a considerable interest in this cellar at present." "It is our French gold," whispered the director. "We have had several warnings that an attempt might be made upon it." "Your French gold?" "Yes. We had an occasion some months ago to strengthen our resources, and borrowed for that purpose 30,000 Napoleons from the Bank of France. It has become known that we have never had occasion to unpack the money, and that it is still lying in our cellar. The crate upon which I sit contains 2,000 Napoleons packed between layers of lead foil. Our reserve of bullion is much larger at present than is usually kept in a single branch office, and the directors have had misgivings upon the subject." "Which were very well justified," observed Holmes. "And now it is time that we arranged our little plans. I expect that within an hour matters will come to a head. In the meantime, Mr. Merryweather, we must put the screen over that dark lantern." "And sit in the dark?" "I am afraid so. I had brought a pack of cards in my pocket, and I thought that, as we were a party carré, you might have your rubber after all. But I see that the enemy's preparations have gone so far that we cannot risk the presence of a light. And, first of all, we must choose our positions. These are daring men, and though we shall take them at a disadvantage, they may do us some harm, unless we are careful. I shall stand behind this crate, and do you conceal yourself behind those. Then, when I flash a light upon them, close in swiftly. If they fire, Watson, have no compunction about shooting them down." I placed my revolver cocked upon the top of the wooden case behind which I crouched. Holmes shot the slide across the front of his lantern and left us in pitch darkness, such an absolute darkness as I have never before experienced. The smell of hot metal remained to assure us that the light was still there, ready to flash out at a moment's notice. To me, with my nerves worked up to a pitch of expectancy, there was something depressing and subduing in the sudden gloom and in the cold, dank air of the vault. "They have but one retreat," whispered Holmes. "That is back through the house into Saxe-Coburg Square. I hope that you have done what I asked you, Jones. I have an inspector and 2 officers waiting at the front door. Then we have stopped all the holes, and now we must be silent and wait." What a time it seemed! From comparing notes afterwards, it was but an hour and a quarter, yet it appeared to me that the night must have almost gone, and the dawn be breaking above us. My limbs were weary and stiff, for I feared to change my position, yet my nerves were worked up to the highest pitch of tension, and my hearing was so acute that I could not only hear the gentle breathing of my companions, but I could distinguish the deeper, heavier in-breathing from the bulky Jones, from the thin, sighing note of the bank director. From my position I could look over the case in the direction of the floor. Suddenly my eyes caught the glint of a light. At first it was but a lurid spark upon the stone pavement. Then it lengthened out until it became a yellow line, and then, without any warning or sound,
A gash seemed to open, and a hand appeared, a white, almost womanly hand, which felt about in the centre of the little area of light. For a minute or more the hand with its writhing fingers protruded out of the floor, then it was withdrawn as suddenly as it had appeared, and all was dark again save the single lurid spark which marked a chink between the stones. Its disappearance, however, was but momentary. With a rending, tearing sound, one of the broad white stones turned over upon its side, and left a square, gaping hole through which streamed the light of a lantern. Over the edge there peeped a clean-cut, boyish face, which looked keenly about it, and then, with a hand on either side of the aperture, drew itself shoulder-high and waist-high, until one knee rested upon the edge. In another instant he stood at the side of the hole, and was hauling after him a companion, lithe and small like himself, with a pale face and a shock of very red hair.
"It's all clear," he whispered. "Have you the chisel and the bags?" "Great Scott, jump, Archie, jump, and I'll swing for it."
Sherlock Holmes had sprung out and seized the intruder by the collar. The other dived down the hole, and I heard the sound of rending cloth as Jones clutched at his skirts. The light flashed upon the barrel of the revolver, but Holmes's hunting crop came down on the man's wrist, and the pistol clinked upon the stone floor. "It's no use, John Clay," said Holmes blandly. "You have no chance at all."
"So I see," the other answered with the utmost coolness.
"I fancy that my pal is all right, though I see you've got his coat-tails." "There are 3 men waiting for him at the door," said Holmes.
"You seem to have done the thing very completely. I must compliment you."
"And I you," Holmes answered. "Your red-headed idea was very new and effective."
"You'll see your pal again presently," said Jones. "He's quicker at climbing down holes than I am. Just hold out while I fix the derbies."
"I beg that you will not touch me with your filthy hands," remarked our prisoner as the handcuffs clattered upon his wrists. "You may not be aware that I have royal blood in my veins. Have the goodness also, when you address me, always to say sir and please."
"All right,"
said Jones with a stare and a snigger.
"Well, would you please, sir, march upstairs where we can get a cab to carry your highness to the police station?"
"That is better," said John Clay serenely. He made a sweeping bow to the 3 of us, and walked quietly off in the custody of the detective. "Really, Mr. Holmes," said Mr. Merryweather, as we followed them from the cellar, "I do not know how the bank can thank you or repay you. There is no doubt that you have detected and defeated, in the most complete manner, one of the most determined attempts at bank robbery that have ever come within my experience. I have had 1 or 2 little scores of my own to settle with Mr. John Clay," said Holmes. "I have been at some small expense over this matter, which I shall expect the bank to refund, but beyond that I am amply repaid by having had an experience which is in many ways unique, and by hearing the very remarkable narrative of the Red-Headed League. You see, Watson," he explained in the early hours of the morning, as we sat over a glass of whisky and soda in Baker Street, "it was perfectly obvious from the first that the only possible object of this rather fantastic business of the advertisement of the League, and the copying of the encyclopedia, must be to get this not over-bright pawnbroker out of the way for a number of hours every day. It was a curious way of managing it, but really it would be difficult to suggest a better. The method was no doubt suggested to Clay's ingenious mind by the colour of his accomplice's hair. The £4 a week was a lure which must draw him, and what was it to them who were playing for thousands? They put in the advertisement, one rogue has the temporary office, the other rogue incites the man to apply for it, and together they managed to secure his absence every morning in the week. From the time that I heard of the assistant having come for half wages, it was obvious to me that he had some strong motive for securing the situation."
"But how could you guess what the motive was?"
"Had there been women in the house, I should have suspected a mere vulgar intrigue. That, however, was out of the question. The man's business was a small one, there was nothing in his house which would account for such elaborate preparations, and such an expenditure as they were at. What could it be? I thought of the assistant's fondness for photography, and his trick of vanishing into the cellar. The cellar, there was the end of this tangled clue. Then I made inquiries as to this mysterious assistant, and found that I had to deal with one of the coolest and most daring criminals in London. He was doing something in the cellar, something which took many hours a day for months on end. What could it be once more? I could think of nothing save that he was running a tunnel to some other building. So far I had got when we went to visit the scene of action. I surprised you by beating upon the pavement with my stick. I was ascertaining whether the cellar stretched out in front or behind. It was not in front. Then I rang the bell, and, as I hoped, the assistant answered it. We have had some skirmishes, but we had never set eyes upon each other before. I hardly looked at his face. His knees were what I wished to see. You must yourself have remarked how worn, wrinkled, and stained they were. They spoke of those hours of burrowing. The only remaining point was what they were burrowing for. I walked round the corner and saw that the City and Suburban Bank abutted onto our friend's premises, and felt I had solved my problem. When you drove home after the concert, I called upon Scotland Yard and upon the chairman of the bank directors, with the result that you have seen. "And how could you tell that they were making their attempt tonight?" I asked. "Well, they closed their league offices. That was a sign that they cared no longer about Mr. Jabez Wilson's presence. In other words, they had completed their tunnel. But it was essential that they should use it soon, as it might be discovered, or the bullion might be removed. Saturday would suit them better than any other day, as it would give them 2 days for their escape. For all these reasons I expected them to come tonight." "You reasoned it out beautifully," I exclaimed in unfeigned admiration. "It is so long a chain, and yet every link rings true." "It saved me from ennui," he answered, yawning. "Alas, I already feel it closing in upon me. My life is spent in one long effort to escape from the commonplaces of existence. These little problems help me to do so." "And you are a benefactor of the race," said I. He shrugged his shoulders. "Well, perhaps. After all, it is of some little use," he remarked. "L'homme c'est rien, l'heureux c'est tout," as Gustave Flaubert once wrote to George Sand. This is the end of The Red-Headed League by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Read by James Evans.